The cashier said, "Sir, your card was declined," and the whole line behind him got quieter in the ugliest way. Not silent. Worse than silent. Whispers. Small sighs. A woman with paper towels in her cart checked her watch like the old man had personally stolen 5 minutes from her life. He stood there in a faded windbreaker and a veteran cap that had gone soft around the brim. His groceries were nothing dramatic. Eggs, bread, coffee, a bottle of generic pain reliever. The kind of basket that tells you a person is buying only what can't be put off. He reached into his wallet again, slowly, carefully, like maybe the right card had simply hidden itself. His hands shook a little. The cashier kept her voice polite, but I could hear the strain in it. "I'm sorry, sir, it's still not going through." The man nodded once. Didn't argue, didn't make a scene. That was the part that got me. He just stood there absorbing the humiliation like he'd practiced it before. I stepped forward, put my basket on the conveyor and said, "Put his on mine too." He turned toward me. "No," he said immediately. His voice was quiet but firm. "You don't need to do that." I looked at the groceries, then at him. "My grandfather served," I said. "That's enough reason." He stared at me for a second. Not grateful, not yet, just surprised. The people behind us stopped whispering. That always happens when kindness interrupts a crowd's boredom. The cashier nodded and started rescanning the items. The old man looked down. Then he said almost under his breath, "You shouldn't have had to." "Maybe not," I said, "but here we are." He gave the smallest nod. I paid for both orders. Didn't wait for thanks. Didn't ask his name. I picked up my bags and left through the sliding doors into the gray Virginia evening. 2 weeks later, my commanding officer called me into his office. He was standing by the window when I arrived, hands behind his back face, unreadable. He looked at me once, then toward the inner room. "The man waiting inside," he said, "you should meet him. Now let me take you back. My name is Claire Hale. I was 27, then stationed outside Norfolk, junior enough to still be corrected sharply, experienced enough to know when a room changed temperature before anyone raised their voice. The military had given me structure, not peace exactly, but structure can look a lot like peace when you come from the kind of family I did. I grew up in a house that respected achievement if it was visible. Money, titles, cars, square footage, anything that could be named at church or over barbecue with the neighbors. What my family didn't understand, they dismissed. And what they couldn't measure, they rarely valued. That was especially true about my grandfather. To me, he was the center of gravity in our family. To everyone else, he was mostly a story they had stopped listening to. My grandfather, Daniel Hale, had served his entire adult life. Navy, then Special Operations, then training and command work until retirement. By the time I was old enough to understand what a uniform meant, he was already older and quieter. The dangerous years were behind him. What remained was posture, discipline, cleanly folded newspaper on the kitchen table, shoes lined up by the door, the habit of answering every question directly. He was never theatrical, never one of those older veterans who made every dinner about old missions and dead friends. In fact, he talked less than almost anyone in our family. That may have been part of the problem. Silence gets mistaken for emptiness in houses full of loud people. My mother used to say he was rigid. My uncle said he had missed too much of real life. My older brother once called him a guy who took orders for 30 years and retired without much to show for it. I was 17 when my brother said that. My grandfather was at the table. He didn't defend himself. He just kept eating. That stayed with me. So did the way my mother changed the subject instead of correcting my brother. That's how disrespect becomes tradition, not through big speeches, through small permissions. The family never insulted him openly when I was a child. Not exactly. They did something more ordinary. They minimized him. His stories became interruptions. His medals stayed in a box no one opened. His discipline got turned into a joke at holidays. My mother preferred talking about my cousin in real estate. My father admired men who built companies and bought beach property. My brother cared about income the way some men care about religion. And my grandfather, he had a pension, a modest house. A garage organized so neatly it looked like a machine itself. And me. I was the only one who asked him questions and waited through the pauses. Maybe because I was quiet too. Maybe because he answered me like I was worth answering. He taught me how to shine shoes properly, how to fold a flag without making a performance of it, how to clean a fishing knife, how to stand still when someone else was trying to make you feel small. He never told me to join the military. That's important. He never recruited me. He just lived in a way that made certain words mean something different. Duty, honor, restraint. Most people hear those words and think of posters. My grandfather made them look domestic. He rinsed his coffee cup immediately after using it. Wrote thank you notes. Arrived 15 minutes early to everything. Took pain in private. One summer when I was 12, I found his dog tags in a drawer and asked why he kept them if he wasn't wearing them anymore. He looked at them for a long moment before answering. So I don't forget who I was responsible for. I didn't fully understand that then. I do now. He died before I made lieutenant. Before I was even commissioned, actually. A stroke. Quiet. Fast. He had been in the garden that morning. By evening, he was gone. The funeral was respectful on the surface. Flag, uniforms, folded condolences. But even then I could feel the family treating it like an obligation with good catering. My mother cried. My brother checked email during the reception. An uncle asked whether Grandpa had left much behind. He meant money. That's always what he meant. I remember standing near the framed photo at the memorial table and feeling something I didn't yet know how to name. Not just grief, protection. Like if I didn't remember him correctly, no one else would. That was probably the real reason I joined. Not patriotism alone, not escape. And not family rebellion, though there was some of that. I joined because I wanted to belong to the value system that had made him who he was. I wanted a life where discipline was not mistaken for lack of imagination, where sacrifice was not measured only in dollars lost, where service meant something before it became convenient to applaud. Military life was harder than I expected, and in certain ways cleaner, not easier, cleaner. People could still be vain, petty, insecure, and cruel in uniform. But the standard existed outside personality. You could work against a standard. That mattered to me. By the time the Walmart incident happened, I had been in long enough to stop romanticizing the institution and start respecting the people who bore it well. That included old men in worn veteran caps buying eggs with shaking hands. I didn't pay for his groceries because I thought I was rescuing someone. I paid because humiliation in public has a smell to it, and I had seen enough of life to know that dignity can disappear in tiny moments if no one steps in. And because every time I saw an older serviceman standing alone, I saw my grandfather in the years after retirement, less because they looked alike, more because they carried the same kind of invisible weight. When my commanding officer called me in 2 weeks later, I assumed it was about work, a scheduling issue, a report, a mistake someone had made and attached to the nearest available name. I stood outside his office for a second before knocking. Inside, he didn't sit down. That was unusual. He nodded toward the inner room. The man waiting inside, he said again, "You should meet him." And something in his tone told me this wasn't about Walmart anymore. I stepped into the inner office expecting an uncomfortable conversation. Maybe the old man had complained. Maybe I had broken some rule about conduct in uniform off base. Maybe my commanding officer thought I had embarrassed someone important. Military life trains you to assume responsibility before you assume praise. The man standing near the window was the same one from Walmart, the same windbreaker, the same veteran cap. But the rest of the picture had changed. He wasn't alone. My commanding officer stood beside him with a posture I rarely saw outside of formal inspections. Respectful, measured. The old man turned when I entered. For a moment neither of us spoke. Up close I noticed details I had missed before. His back was straighter than I remembered, his eyes sharper. The cap was still worn, but the man inside it was not fragile. Not really. My commanding officer gestured toward him. "Lieutenant Hale," he said, "this is General Victor Reinhardt." The name hung in the air for a moment. I had heard it before. Anyone who had spent time around naval command structures had. Decorated, strategic command. Retired but still influential. I blinked once. The man from Walmart nodded. "Good morning, Lieutenant." His voice was steady. Calm. And now unmistakably authoritative. I stood a little straighter. "Sir." He studied my face. Not suspiciously. More like he was confirming something he had already suspected. "2 weeks ago he said you paid for my groceries at a Walmart outside Norfolk." "Yes, sir. You didn't stay for thanks." "No, sir. Why I thought about that for a moment. Because the answer mattered more here than it had in the checkout line." "My grandfather served," I said. "That was enough reason." The general watched me carefully. Something softened in his expression. Then he asked the question that shifted the entire room. "What was your grandfather's name?" "Daniel Hale." The silence that followed was not the awkward kind. It was the kind that feels like the ground settling after something heavy has been placed on it. General Reinhardt lowered his head slightly. Just a fraction. Then he looked back up. "Robert Daniel Hale." "Yes, sir." For the first time since I entered the room, my commanding officer spoke. "You know the name?" The general gave a quiet, almost surprised laugh. "I knew the man." He turned toward me again. "I served with your grandfather." My mind paused. Not rejected, just paused. Because growing up, no one in my family had ever talked about my grandfather in terms that suggested people like this would remember him. "He was in special operations," I said carefully. "Yes." The general nodded. "And one of the finest soldiers I ever worked beside." I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, because hearing someone say it out loud felt strange, almost disorienting. General Reinhardt walked slowly toward the desk and rested one hand on the edge. "You look like him." I almost smiled. "That's what people say. Not the face," he said. "The way you stand." That comment landed somewhere deeper than the others. For a moment none of us spoke. Then the general gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, Lieutenant." I sat. My commanding officer remained standing. The general took the chair opposite mine. "You know," he said slowly, "after Walmart I had someone run a background check. I didn't react. That was not surprising. Powerful people often confirm what their instincts suggest. You're stationed here 3 years. "Yes, sir." "Clean record?" "Yes, sir." "Strong evaluations?" "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Your grandfather would not be surprised." I felt something tighten in my chest. A reaction I had not expected. "My family doesn't talk about him that way," I said before I could stop myself. The words surprised even me. The general noticed. "How do they talk about him?" I hesitated. My commanding officer shifted slightly but said nothing. "They respect him," I said finally. The general watched my face, then shook his head slowly. "No. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. They don't understand him." I didn't answer, because that was closer to the truth. He leaned back slightly. "Your grandfather was a rare kind of soldier. What kind? The kind people trust when things go wrong." He paused. Calm, precise, never dramatic. That description sounded painfully familiar. He trained half the men who later ran our operations units. My commanding officer's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That many." The general nodded. He wasn't famous because he didn't want to be. He looked back at me. But the people who mattered remembered. I felt my throat tighten slightly. Not grief, not exactly. Something quieter. Recognition. General Reinhardt folded his hands. "I want to ask you something." "Yes, sir." "Your family must be very proud of him." The room grew still again. My commanding officer looked toward me. The general waited. The answer sat in my mouth for several seconds before I spoke. "No, sir." Neither man interrupted. "They respected his service," I said carefully. "But they didn't really value it." The general's eyes didn't leave my face. "What did they value? Success you can measure. Money, yes. Property, yes. Status, yes. He nodded slowly. That happens. The calmness in his voice surprised me. You're not angry, I said. No. Why? Because soldiers are often misunderstood outside the places they serve. He paused. Your grandfather knew that. I stared at the desk for a moment. He never complained. Of course not. The general leaned forward slightly. He didn't serve for applause. I nodded. Then the general said something that changed the direction of the conversation completely. I would like to visit your family. I looked up. My family, sir, yes. Why, he answered without hesitation. I would like to pay my respects to your grandfather. The room was silent again. Then he added quietly, and there are things they should know about the man they lived with. My commanding officer finally spoke. What kind of things? The general looked at me. Then said calmly, the kind of things that explain why I never forgot his name. The drive to my parents' house took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of quiet roads and winter trees that had already lost their leaves. General Reinhardt sat beside me in the passenger seat. He hadn't insisted on bringing an escort. No security detail, no convoy. Just an old soldier visiting another one. That alone told me more about him than the medals on his chest. For most of the drive, we didn't talk. Military people often share that kind of silence comfortably. But eventually he said, "You're nervous." I kept my eyes on the road. A little. Because of me, no sir. Because of them. Yes. He nodded once. That makes sense. Another mile passed. You should know something, he added. Yes, sir. I'm not coming to embarrass your family. I didn't think you were. I'm coming because a man like your grandfather deserves to be remembered properly. I glanced at him briefly. That might surprise them. Good. We pulled into the gravel driveway just before noon. The house looked exactly the way it always had. Same white siding, same old oak tree leaning slightly toward the garage. My mother's car was already there. So was my brother's truck. Word spreads quickly in families when someone important is coming. My mother opened the door before we reached the steps. Her expression changed the moment she saw the general's uniform. That polite social smile appeared immediately. The one reserved for people she believed mattered. Welcome, she said warmly. General Reinhardt, it's an honor. The general nodded politely. Ma'am. My father stepped forward next. He shook the general's hand with visible respect. We appreciate you coming. My brother stood behind them with folded arms. He looked impressed, curious, but mostly interested in the kind of power he could measure. That's quite a uniform, he said. The general gave a small smile. It's just a uniform. Inside, my mother had already prepared coffee. The dining table was cleared. Everything about the scene looked like an important guest visit. I watched it quietly, because something about the whole moment felt slightly off. Not wrong, just revealing. My grandfather's photo hung in the hallway like it always had. Small frame, tucked beside a shelf of family pictures. Not the center of attention, just part of the background. The general stopped walking when he saw it. He stepped closer. Looked at the photo for a long moment. That's him? No one answered. My mother finally said, We keep his picture there. The general nodded slowly. Yes. His voice carried something that made the room quiet again. Not criticism. Something deeper. Memory. My father gestured toward the dining table. Please sit. We all did. Coffee cups were passed around. Small talk started the way it always does. Weather, traffic, how long the general had been retired. Then my brother asked the question he had been waiting to ask. So, General, he said casually, how did you know my grandfather? The general placed his cup down carefully. We served together. In special operations? Yes. My brother leaned back slightly. That must have been intense work. It was. My father nodded respectfully. He didn't talk much about those years. That's typical. My mother folded her hands. We always assumed he just did his duty. The general looked at her. Just. The word sat quietly in the room. She hesitated. Well, you know what I mean? I do. He turned toward the hallway again, toward the photo. Your father was the kind of soldier other men followed without hesitation. My father looked surprised. He never mentioned that. He wouldn't. Why not? Because men like him rarely talk about themselves. The room grew still. The general leaned forward slightly. Your father served 32 years. My father nodded. Yes. During that time he trained 3 generations of special operations officers. My brother's eyebrows lifted. 3 generations. Yes. He designed survival protocols that are still used today. My mother blinked. I didn't know that. The general nodded. Most people didn't. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, pulled out a small velvet case. He placed it gently on the table, then opened it. Inside was a medal. Not flashy, but unmistakably military. My father kept that, my father asked. No. The general shook his head. He refused it. The room went completely silent. Refused, my brother repeated. Yes. Why? The general's answer came slowly. He believed recognition should go to the team. My mother looked confused. He never told us. He wouldn't. The general closed the case again, then looked around the room. Your father was respected by every soldier who served under him. He paused. Men trusted him with their lives. My brother shifted slightly. That's impressive. But the word sounded small now. The general turned toward me. Lieutenant Hale. Yes, sir. Would you show me where he's buried? My mother stood quickly. Of course. The family moved together toward the door. But before we stepped outside, the general said something quietly that stopped everyone. There are things about your father's service you should hear. He looked at my family. Things that explain why the men who served with him still remember his name. The cemetery sat on a small hill outside town. It wasn't large, just rows of simple stones and 2 tall maple trees that had already dropped most of their leaves. The wind moved softly through the branches when we arrived. General Reinhardt stepped out of the car slowly. Not because he was weak, because soldiers approach graves differently than other places. My family followed a few steps behind. My mother carried a small bouquet. My father walked with his hands in his coat pockets. My brother checked his phone once before slipping it back into his jacket. Old habits die slowly. The headstone was simple. Daniel Robert Hale, U.S. Navy, 1939 to 2016. Nothing dramatic. No long list of accomplishments. Just the name. The general stopped in front of it. He removed his cap. For a full minute no one spoke. The wind moved through the grass. My mother shifted slightly beside me. Finally, the general said quietly, Your grandfather hated attention. My father nodded. That sounds right. He believed soldiers should do their work and go home. My brother crossed his arms. Well, he definitely did that part. The general turned toward him slowly. There was no anger in his face, but something in the air changed. Your grandfather didn't just do his work, he said. He built the work. The words landed heavier than expected. My father frowned slightly. What do you mean? The general stepped closer to the grave. During the late 70s, naval special operations were changing. He spoke calmly, like a man explaining history rather than defending a friend. Your father helped design the training structure that still exists today. My brother looked surprised. He designed it? He helped build it. The general continued. He trained officers who later led operations across 3 decades. My mother blinked. He never told us that. No. The general smiled faintly. He told us not to. My father shifted his weight. You mean he didn't want credit? That's correct. The wind moved through the trees again. The general placed a small coin on the top edge of the headstone. I recognized the gesture immediately. A challenge coin. Something soldiers leave when they want another soldier to know they came. My brother noticed. What's that for? It tells the next man who visits that someone from his unit was here. My brother nodded slowly. Oh. The general turned toward my family again. There's something else you should know. My father looked uneasy now. What's that? Your father retired earlier than he had to. Yes, my father said. We always assumed he was tired. The general shook his head gently. He retired because the men he trained were ready. The words sat quietly in the cold air. Then the general looked directly at my father. Your father believed leadership meant stepping aside when the next generation was prepared. My mother's eyes filled slightly. He never explained that. He wouldn't have. My brother spoke again. So basically he was a teacher. The general smiled. Yes. Then he added something that made the air feel heavier. One of the best the Navy ever had. No one moved for a moment. My father stared at the stone. I didn't know. The general didn't answer immediately, because sometimes silence is the only respectful response to regret. After a moment, he said quietly, "Most families don't." My mother stepped forward and placed the flowers at the base of the grave. Her hands trembled slightly. He always seemed so quiet. He wasn't quiet, the general said. He was careful. He looked at the headstone again. Men like him speak when it matters. My brother cleared his throat. So why did you come all the way here? The general turned toward him. 2 reasons. He held up 2 fingers. First, I owed your grandfather a visit. My father nodded. And the second. The general looked at me. Because the man who trained me believed the next generation should be chosen carefully. The words made my chest tighten. My brother frowned. What does that mean? The general's eyes stayed on me. It means your grandfather left something behind. My father looked confused. You mean his legacy? Yes. But legacies don't just live in stories. He paused. They live in people. The wind moved across the hill again. The general reached into his coat pocket and removed another small object. A second coin. He handed it to me. I took it carefully. The metal was cold in my hand. Your grandfather gave me one like that when I finished training under him. My throat tightened. Sir, you carry yourself the way he did. My brother laughed quietly. She's always been the serious one. The general ignored the comment. He looked at me with the calm focus of a man used to making decisions that affect other people's lives. I came today because I wanted to see where he came from. He glanced at my family, then back at me, and to decide whether his legacy deserved to continue. The words hung in the air. My father looked confused. What decision? The general's answer was quiet. The one about where Lieutenant Hale serves next. The drive back from the cemetery was quieter than the drive there. No one rushed to speak. The road curved past the same houses we had passed earlier. But the silence inside the car had changed. It wasn't awkward. It was reflective. My mother sat in the back seat beside my father. They didn't talk much. Once in a while, my father looked out the window the way people do when they are reviewing years of memories all at once. General Reinhardt sat beside me again. His posture relaxed, but his eyes were thoughtful. You handled that well, he said quietly. I didn't do much. You listened. That seemed appropriate. He nodded. That's another thing you share with your grandfather. We reached the house 20 minutes later. My brother's truck was already in the driveway again. He must have taken a separate car from the cemetery. Inside, my mother set fresh coffee on the table. No one mentioned lunch. No one turned on the television. The house felt different now, not dramatic, just rearranged, like a room after furniture has been moved. My father sat down slowly. General Reinhardt remained standing near the window for a moment before turning back toward the table. You asked earlier why I came, he said. My brother leaned forward. Yes, I told you there were 2 reasons. My father nodded. The first was to visit your father. And the second, my brother asked. The general looked at me. The second involves Lieutenant Hale. My mother looked from him to me. What about Claire? The general pulled a folder from his coat. Plain. Military issue. He set it gently on the table. My father studied it like a man looking at paperwork that might change a family decision. Before I retired, the general said calmly, I oversaw a training command responsible for selecting officers for advanced operational leadership. My brother's eyebrows lifted. That sounds important. It was. He opened the folder. Inside were several documents, evaluations, reports. My name appeared on the top page. I reviewed Lieutenant Hale's service record after the incident at Walmart. My father looked at me. You never mentioned that. It didn't seem relevant. The general continued. Her evaluations show discipline, composure under pressure, and strong leadership potential. My brother shifted slightly. So you're offering her a promotion? Not exactly. He closed the folder again. I'm offering her a transfer. My mother frowned slightly. A transfer where the general's voice remained steady. To the unit I once commanded. My father leaned back. That's a significant position. Yes. My brother looked impressed. Special operations? Yes. My mother's eyes moved to me. Claire, I hadn't spoken yet, because the moment felt bigger than the offer itself. The general continued. Your grandfather believed the next generation of officers should be selected carefully. He looked at me again. When I saw how you handled that situation in Walmart, I recognized something. My brother smiled. You mean kindness. The general shook his head gently. Restraint. The word landed differently. Kindness can be emotional, he said. Restraint is discipline. My father nodded slowly. That sounds like my father. Yes. The general folded his hands behind his back. The unit will begin its next training cycle in 3 months. My mother looked uneasy. That means Claire would have to move. Yes. To another city. Yes. My father looked at me. What do you think I hadn't answered because the question wasn't simple? Not because I didn't want the opportunity, because accepting it meant leaving something behind. My family, my hometown, the familiar roads where my grandfather had walked. The general spoke again. You don't need to decide today. I looked at him. But you already know my answer. He smiled slightly. Yes. My brother leaned back in his chair. Well, that's impressive. My mother looked at the folder again. Your grandfather would be proud. I felt something tighten in my chest. I hope so. The general walked toward the hallway, toward the small framed photo of my grandfather. He stopped in front of it again. Then he said something quietly that no one in the room was prepared for. Your grandfather once told me something during training. My father looked up. What was it? The general's voice softened. He said the hardest part of service isn't facing danger. The room was silent. It's knowing that the people you protect may never understand what you gave up. My mother lowered her eyes. My father didn't move. My brother stared at the table. The general turned back toward me. But sometimes he said quietly, one person understands. The house was quiet after General Reinhardt left. Not the comfortable quiet that settles over a home at the end of the day. This one carried weight. My brother stood near the kitchen counter, turning the general's words over in his mind. My mother gathered empty cups slowly. My father remained seated at the table, elbows resting on the wood as if the conversation had left him physically tired. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, my brother broke the silence. So that's it, he said. She just gets recruited into some elite unit because she bought a guy groceries. His voice wasn't hostile, but it carried the kind of skepticism that had shaped our family for years. My father shook his head slightly. That's not what happened. My brother shrugged. Then what did happen? I didn't answer. My father did. Your grandfather happened. The room fell quiet again. My brother leaned against the counter. You're telling me Dad was some kind of legend and we just missed it. My father looked toward the hallway where the photo still hung. I think we misunderstood him. My mother stopped wiping the counter. Maybe we misunderstood a lot of things. I stood by the window. Outside, the oak tree moved slightly in the evening wind. For the first time that day, I spoke. I didn't join the Navy because I thought Grandpa was famous. My brother looked at me. Then why? Because he was steady. He frowned. That's it. Yes. My mother looked at me with something softer in her eyes now. Your grandfather believed in quiet responsibility. I nodded. That's the part I understood. My father leaned back in his chair. He never explained his career to us. No, my mother said. He didn't. My brother folded his arms. Well, I guess we all underestimated him. The sentence hung in the room. My father didn't respond immediately, because there was a deeper truth behind it. Eventually, he said quietly, "We underestimated more than him." My mother looked toward me. Claire. Yes, if you accept that position, will we see you less? The question carried the simple fear of a parent realizing their child's life is moving somewhere they cannot follow. Probably, I said gently. She nodded slowly. I understand. My brother rubbed the back of his neck. That kind of work sounds dangerous. It can be. He looked at the table. Grandpa never said that either. He didn't want to. The room fell quiet again. My father finally stood and walked toward the hallway. He stopped in front of my grandfather's photo. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he said something I had never heard him say before. I'm sorry. The apology wasn't loud, but it carried through the house. My mother closed her eyes briefly. My brother looked down at the floor. I stayed where I was. Because sometimes apologies belong to the past more than the present. After a while, my father turned back toward us. You'll take the transfer. It wasn't a question. Yes. My mother nodded slowly. You should. My brother forced a small smile. Well, someone in this family should probably live up to Grandpa's reputation. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The sun had started to set by then. Orange light spread across the yard outside the window. I slipped the dog tags from my pocket and held them for a moment. Cold metal. Familiar weight. My grandfather had once told me something when I was 12. We were standing in the garage while he cleaned an old fishing knife. He said people don't always recognize the right kind of success. I had asked what he meant. He wiped the blade carefully before answering. Some lives are measured in money. He paused. Others are measured in responsibility. At the time, I didn't fully understand. Now I did. That evening, I packed my bag quietly in the guest room. Not because I was leaving immediately, but because something inside me had already moved forward. My mother knocked softly on the door. You'll call us, she said. I will. She hesitated for a moment. Your grandfather would have liked the person you became. I nodded. That means more than you think. She gave a small smile. Then she left the room. The house settled into night. Down the hall, my father turned off the lights one by one. My brother closed the front door. And in the quiet darkness of the house where my grandfather had once lived, something had changed. Not loudly, but permanently. Because sometimes the truth about a person arrives long after they are gone. And when it does, the people who remain must decide what to do with the regret. 3 months later, I stood on a tarmac before sunrise. Cold wind moved across the base, carrying the smell of jet fuel and ocean air from the Norfolk harbor. The sky was still dark. A thin gray line sat low on the horizon where morning was beginning to push its way in. I adjusted the strap on my duffel bag and waited. The transport aircraft behind me hummed quietly. Engines warming. Crew moving through their routines. Everything felt calm. Not peaceful exactly, but steady. That was the word my grandfather would have used. Steady. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my mother. Safe travels. We're proud of you. I read it once, then slipped the phone away. Some things don't need replies. Across the runway, General Reinhardt walked toward me. Even in retirement, he still moved like a commander. Straight back, measured pace. Eyes that noticed everything. "You're early," he said when he reached me. "I learned from the best." He smiled faintly. "Your grandfather said the same thing." We stood there for a moment watching the crew prepare the aircraft. Then he asked, "Any second thoughts?" "No." "That's good." He studied my face briefly. "You look calmer than most officers I recruit. I know what I'm walking into." "Do you?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Good." The wind picked up slightly. I reached into my pocket and touched the dog tags again. The same ones my grandfather had carried decades earlier. The metal felt warm now. Familiar. General Reinhardt noticed. "You still carry them?" "Yes," he would approve. I didn't answer, because approval wasn't the reason I carried them. Responsibility was. The general spoke again after a moment. "You know your family will understand more with time." "Maybe. Regret has a way of teaching people." I looked toward the horizon. The sun was just beginning to break through. I don't need them to understand everything. No, no. What do you need? I thought about that. About the years my grandfather spent living quietly while the world misunderstood him. About the moment in Walmart when a simple act of respect had connected 2 generations of soldiers. I just need to do the job well. The general nodded. That's exactly what he would say. The crew chief signaled that boarding would begin soon. A few other officers approached the aircraft carrying gear, most of them younger than me, some nervous, some excited, all of them stepping into a life that would change them. General Reinhardt extended his hand. "Welcome to the next chapter, Lieutenant." I shook it. "Thank you, sir." Then he said something quietly. "Your grandfather would have been proud today." I took a breath. "I hope I earned that." "You will." I picked up my duffel bag and started walking toward the aircraft. Halfway there, I stopped, turned back once. The general still stood near the edge of the runway watching. Behind him, the base stretched out toward the water. Ships in the harbor, aircraft moving slowly along taxiways, men and women beginning another day of service. The kind of world my grandfather had belonged to. The kind of world I now belong to as well. I climbed the ramp and found a seat near the back. The interior of the aircraft was loud but familiar. Straps, metal walls, gear stacked carefully along the sides. A young officer across from me adjusted his helmet and gave a quick nod. "First assignment?" I smiled slightly. "Something like that." He laughed nervously. "I hear this unit doesn't tolerate mistakes." "That's probably true." The ramp closed. Engines roared louder. The aircraft began to move. As the ground rolled slowly beneath us, I looked down at the dog tags in my hand one last time. Then I slipped them back into my pocket. Because legacy doesn't belong in your hand. It belongs in what you do next. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever seen someone quietly carry a lifetime of service without recognition, take a moment today to remember them. Not because they asked for it, but because people like that helped build the world we live in. Sometimes the greatest lives are the ones no one fully understands until long after they're gone. And when the truth finally arrives, the best way to honor it is simple: live with the same kind of courage.